When you create a great original game, one of the first questions to follow it up is usually, how about a sequel? It feels like a no-brainer to try and keep the ball rolling, but creating a follow-up of any kind comes with its own set of problems, hence why there is no foolproof formula to making a universally acclaimed sequel, at least in theory. Enter RGG Studio, one of my favorite developers and a team who has had no shortage of development or resource troubles to overcome with each entry. Their first game actually being finished and becoming a massive success was a shock to many, but an even bigger shock tied to Yakuza's debut was how its sequel would need to be developed in less than a year. Naturally, there would be a degree of repetition present in the sequel, but what I didn't expect was that RGG would also end up creating this blueprint, or sequel philosophy, that could help them anytime they had to follow up a game that was seen as a fresh beginning for the team. Having played the Yakuza games for thousands of hours over the years, I noticed certain patterns repeating, ones that could unify not just games like Yakuza 1, Kurohyou 1, Judgment, and Yakuza 7 under a general design blueprint, but a similar thing could be said for their direct sequels, following a different yet still recognizable blueprint. If you ever heard the phrase second game problem mentioned while discussing the stories of these follow-ups, you've likely been aware of this yourselves. So today, let's try to determine what this problem, and Yakuza's sequel philosophy at large, even entail. In the context of this video, the Yakuza sequel philosophy showcases a repeating trend in how RGG continues the storyline and evolves the gameplay of entries following the introduction of a self-sufficient protagonist. The games you currently see were all commonly the subject of extensive praise due to how unique they felt, and how succinct the arcs of their respective leads were. By comparison, while their direct sequels would also become the subject of extensive praise, they'd showcase a distinct reliance on design stipulations that took away from the experimental nature of their predecessors. These stipulations include our protagonist going through a significantly less personal character arc than in the first game, a general emphasis of the new campaign on spectacle and scale, more so than emotional impact, showcasing vast mechanical refinement over their predecessor, particularly in the combat department, and lastly, leaving your protagonist in a comparable spot narratively at the end of the second game as they were in the first, leaving the second campaign to feel almost inconsequential in the long run, or outright resulting in a cutoff point of the protagonist's evolutionary cycle. This final bit is likely the main one that will result in a division of opinions, but we'll get to that in due time. For now, let's start with addressing the idea of less personal arcs in Yakuza sequels. The first game in a cycle introduces a brand new protagonist and conventionally tells a fairly self-contained story. The protagonist undergoes tremendous personal growth, overcomes some deeply seated trauma, and has a much brighter outlook on life as a result of the hardship overcome in the campaign. In Yakuza 1, Kiryu, despite losing dozens of friends, found a new meaning in life by taking care of Haruka. He helped the organization that shaped him overcome its greatest turmoil up to that point, and he showcased grand emotional resilience in the way he honored the relationship with his father figure in spite of the latter's transgressions. All of these accomplishments and the sacrifices witnessed would be frequently called back to as Kiryu's story in the series kept evolving. By comparison, in Yakuza 2, many of his accomplishments there, or attempts at building on his character, are in a lot of ways undermined in the long run. Kiryu falls in love with Sayama, only for Yakuza 3 to write her off and never called back to her until the bucket list in Infinite Wealth, reiterating how Yumi was his one true love after all. He saves the Tojo clan yet again, but that becomes a staple of almost every game where he is playable, thus lessening the impact of this particular rescue, despite it being tied to the Omi alliance. We have a case of the world around the character evolving, but Kiryu himself largely remaining stationary. And while there are some great additions here that will be fleshed out in subsequent entries, most notably Daigo and his dynamic with Kiryu, we're left on a similar endpoint like in Yakuza 1 here. Kiryu once again goes away from Tokyo to pursue a quieter life with Haruka, leaves the Tojo clan in presumably good hands, and that's about it. Moving on from Yakuza 2, let's take a look at the Kurohyou games. In the first entry, Tatsuya starts off the story as a self-sabotaging teen with anger issues and an inability to maintain steady social relationships. But through the fights at Dragon Heat, most of which involve opponents with a personal grudge against him for his past misdoings, he manages to steadily grow as a person and connect with people on a deeper level. He has a more positive outlook on life by the end, and his future looks promising, though we're not sure what he'll do with his life moving forward. In Kurohyou 2, while the campaign doesn't undermine this development, as his starting point here is very much in tune with where we left off, he also doesn't change as a result of the second game's events. We once again have a variety of underground fighters to dispatch, but more often than not, the emotional weight of the fights is tied to Tatsuya's present or future friends, rather than something tied to Tatsuya's transgressions or further development. It reiterates how he has become a better person, as was shown in the first game, but doesn't do much to move him forward or backward in any way writing-wise. And at the end of the campaign, despite a still positive outlook on life, we're left with the same types of questions surrounding what his future would have in store for him. In Judgment, Yagami had a lot of emotional baggage to handle, as he quit being a lawyer due to the belief his actions led to the death of an innocent girl. Through the events of the first game, he regained his sense of justice, stopped a serial killer, undid a grand conspiracy, and reaffirmed that his choice to become a detective was the right thing for him after all. In LJ, on the other hand, while we raise some great questions over the concepts of personal justice and the flawed legal system, they don't really impact Yagami in a way comparable to the events of the first game. He once again acknowledges that the system is flawed, like when Okubo Shinpei was convicted in the first game. We again see the loss of an innocent life that deeply affects Yagami. He once again undoes a conspiracy related to the Ministry of Health, and by the end, returns to his usual detective business. We are not given the chance to see how the messages of the final antagonist impacted Yagami's own mindset, if they've done so at all. Lastly, in the case of Yakuza 7, Ichi witnesses the loss of his father figure and brother figure, has to rebuild his life from the ground up, learn to exist in a world where his lifestyle has become obsolete, but he succeeds in seeing all of this through to a natural conclusion, creating unshakable bonds with a variety of friends along the way. Fast forward to Infinite Wealth, and we have to redo many of the arcs he undergoes in the first game, just to end up in a nigh-identical place by the end, though with less emotional impact as far as Ichi is concerned. He's once again at rock bottom, due to losing his job at Hello Work, once again helps bring about a Yakuza disillusion, still sees the good in people, even when it may be to a fault, and is once again tasked with handling the future of the Yakuza, something he already helped with by rehabilitating ex-members in Infinite Wealth's opening. The main additions in this game are the fact that he is now dating Sayako and how he met his mom, but we've yet to see how, or if, that will impact him moving forward. So to tie all of this up in one description, the arcs the protagonists undergo in these sequels either feature developments whose relevance is diminished in the long run, or outright repeat a variety of plot points with a lesser emotional payoff. The world around them evolves, but the protagonists themselves don't. The next point to discuss is the emphasis on spectacle and scale. Essentially, the sequels offer us technically grander conspiracies to tackle than before, and introduce brand new environments that broaden the scope of the campaign, choices that in many ways go hand in hand. Instead of dealing with a big Yakuza conflict spanning the Kanto region, now you throw in the Kansai region into the conflict as well, with the Omi Alliance waging war on the Tojo. Similar rules apply to the Ashura attacking Dragon Heat in Kurohyou, and letting that conflict engulf Tokyo in its entirety due to the involvement of its governor behind the scenes. There was also the frequent street gang conflict in Sotenbori that was a byproduct of the Ashura's involvement to consider, as it adds to the feeling of a grander scale than in the first game. Lost Judgment has RK try to expand their reach from their modest beginnings in Tokyo with the backing of public security, as they end up becoming the de facto henchmen that deal with any dirty work concerning higher echelons of the Japanese government as the story progresses. Between this and the variety of casualties spanning both Kamurocho and Yokohama at large, and the adding of pre-established groups like the Liumang into the mix, it's easy to see how the number of people involved would contribute to a more grandiose feeling to the campaign. As for Infinite, the overseas nuclear subplot tied to Bryce is definitely a step up from the scale of Yakuza 7. The second dissolution vows to involve even more Yakuza clans than before, despite it initially being a ruse. You add in the Barracuda, the Ganjo, and Palikana into the narrative, alongside the villainous groups already established in the previous century that are now making a resurgence, and once again, the stakes should feel much higher than before. Now, in terms of the sense of spectacle I mentioned earlier, the presentation and set pieces of the sequels speak to this point very succinctly. It feels like a lot of the additions in these games are just here because they'd be cool and fun, rather than them being integral to the story being told. For example, in Yakuza 2, I can't imagine a logical reason for the existence of a castle fortress within a larger castle where you fight an army of ninjas, 2 tigers, and partake in a massive turret section, all while evading a variety of Indiana Jones-esque traps, but it's bloody amazing to see regardless. Similarly, I don't know why Hayashi was given one of the best boss fights of the game, with him having even more HP than Final Ryuji, but again, the answer very likely is because it's awesome. There's a variety of other examples in a similar vein, like the bombastic nature of the Ashura arena fights in Kurohyou 2, and the never-ending long battle in their tunnel, the number of unique fights in LJ, like the boat fight with Kuwana, the arcade fight where you can only heal with on-site procurement, or the final set piece with a bunch of parkour segments throughout. And as for Infinite Wealth, dear lord, just look at District 5, the Nirvana Hotel, Nele Island, and everything in between. Even if the stories feel less personal than those of the first games, RGG does their best to make up for that with unprecedented spectacle. Next, we have the gameplay improvements, which for some can even equate to the sequels simply featuring significantly more content, though the ways in which pre-existing parts of Yakuza were refined are the more important things to note in this section. Look at almost any element of your playthrough and there will be improvements, like with the far better traversal options, seen in the addition of taxis in Kurohyou 2, the implementation of the skateboard in LJ, the Segway being a thing in Infinite Wealth, alongside the ability to travel anywhere from the map itself, or even technical things like the faster screen transitions in Yakuza 2 compared to its predecessor. There's also the more particular improvements, like the addition of recruitable NPCs in Kurohyou 2 that can now help you in regular exploration too, rather than just being usable in the multiplayer. You have the betterment of some detective elements in LJ, most notably with the overhauls made to the tailing missions, and the fact that there's now a much lesser emphasis on them in the critical path. As for the combat improvements specifically, this point is the most self-explanatory for anyone who played these games, and honestly, there are far too many improvements present to either list all of them or adequately explain them, without derailing the video even further. With that in mind, here's just a handful of betterments from each sequel. Yakuza 2 has a far better lock-on, starts you off with a faster combo speed from the get-go, introduces a variety of advanced tech, allowing for more freedom in combat, with the likes of reversals and more reliable back combos, ramps up the number of heat actions compared to the first game, and so on. Kurohyou 2 introduces the self-taught style, allowing you to mix and match parts of your other movesets, like a more streamlined version of God Hand's tech selection, alongside granting access to a multitude of stat buffs to fill in any remaining blanks. The game got rid of level 2 heat from Kurohyou 1 by having you switch immediately to level 3 once enough heat is generated, but it also allows you to do environmental heat actions whenever you're in an adequate position for them, without consuming heat. Whereas in the first game, you had to be at level 2 heat to execute them. You have significantly more special moves to unlock at the dojo, the partners that can accompany you in combat help with the group encounters if you're really struggling, alongside throwing in more heat actions for you to do. And really, everything present makes for a brilliant combat playground no matter the skill level. Moving on to LJ, bloody hell, where do we even begin? It polishes the previously introduced styles to near perfection, while also throwing in 2 additional styles. You have the implementation of skills comparable to the time for blank skills from Kiwami 1, where each style has a particular benefit to carry into another one for a given period of time, And of course, you have the instance of RGG turning what was likely an unintended state in Judgment into a prominent addition to the rest of the combat system in the form of juggling. Add to this the adaptive XP system, and how a variety of advanced tech present from older Yakuza games really gets to shine here, and it's no surprise why so many people hail this as one of RGG's best accomplishments. Lastly, with Infinite Wealth, it introduces moving in combat, allowing for more control and tactical opportunities in a fight. It always replenishes MP during the use of basic attacks, which used to be a predominantly number-specific trait in Yakuza 7. You have the addition of combo attacks or back attack bonuses, proximity bonuses, Dragon's Resurgence for Kiryu, tag attacks unique to each party member. They could be used individually or saved for a super strong attack with Ichi's friendship skill, and the list goes on, just like with all the other games here. Even if some design elements may feel like they were a downgrade compared to the first games, for example, the nature of the acupuncture clinic in Yakuza 2, or the aggression of Kurohyou's combat encounters for some players, or the removal of skill shortcuts in Infinite Wealth, when looked at as a whole, the second games in RGG's cycle are the more refined takes on given subsets in terms of combat philosophy. Finally, for the first half of this video, we have a negative stipulation where the second game in a cycle either marks the abrupt end of a given protagonist's journey or has its narrative be perceived as nigh inconsequential compared to what followed. The first half of the sentiment is pretty evident in both Kurohyou 2 and Lost Judgment, as we've yet to see a proper entry continue the stories of Tatsuya and Yagami respectively. With regards to the second half of the statement, it should be noted that subsequent games of the Kiryu saga take significantly more cues from a game like Yakuza 3 than they would Yakuza 2. The importance of the orphanage to Kiryu's development cannot be understated, as it's directly shown in Yakuza 5, 6, Gaiden, and Infinite as one of the biggest driving factors to his actions. The story of Yakuza 6, which was once touted as the end of the Dragon's saga, probably took the most cues from Yakuza 3 specifically. Looking at the Hirose family being an analog to the Ryuda family, in a sense, the existence of the boss to Aniki transition with both Nagumo and Rikiya, the dynamic intro of the final boss of Yakuza 6 bearing a striking resemblance to that of 3's final boss, and so on. This isn't to say that elements introduced in Yakuza 2 play no role in subsequent entries, as the return of the Omi Alliance, Daigo's prominence in the stories, or even the resurgence of the Jingwon wouldn't be a thing without this game, but the actual events of Yakuza 2 are commonly relegated to the equivalent of glorified footnotes, compared to many of the events that would follow them, which is unfortunate. At present time, we don't even know if the third entry of the Ichiban saga will continue this trend, and have its events overshadow the back and forth present in Infinite Wealth. Considering past trends, I wouldn't rule that out, but I hope that RGG incorporates more of Infinite's elements in the long run, rather than abandoning much of the new cast in favor of different potential newcomers from LAD 9. So, to conclude this first section, it's evident that there is a degree of repetition present, but if the talking points up to now felt too vague for the topic, and you'd prefer some more specific examples of do-overs or a supposed formula reliance, then that's where the second section of the video comes in. The degree of repetition between two observed games can be split into three groups, including general repetition, like the mirroring of a past sequel's chapter structure, using the same plot detours in different chapters between the sequels, and repeats that occur in the exact same chapters in both games. The story relevance of the repeats can vary, but the point of this section is to simply list out specific resemblances, so apologies for the repetitive nature of the upcoming narration. Let's start with the similarities going between Yakuza 1 and Yakuza 2. There will be no entries in the general similarities group, so we will immediately go over to the notable repeats occurring in different chapters. These include a point in the story where the florist's son is in trouble, resulting in a detour, which happens in Yakuza 1's Chapter 6 and Yakuza 2's Chapter 10. We have a necessary detour where Kiryu and Haruka have some bonding time, occurring in Yakuza 1's Chapter 7 and 2's Chapter 13. Then there's the occurrence of a Haruka abduction that leads into a long battle outside the central districts of the games, exemplified in Yakuza 1's chapters 9 and 10 that lead us to Yokohama, as well as Yakuza 2's chapter 12 that leads us to Osaka Castle. We fight two of the same minor villains in both games, those being Hayashi in chapters 4 and 8, and Shindo in chapters 7 and 9 between the two relevant entries. And lastly, for this category, we have the utilization of a Shangri-La long battle in chapter 11 of Yakuza 1 and chapter 8 of Yakuza 2. Lastly, for the first two games, we have the category of repeats that occur in the exact same chapters in both games. In chapter 3, we partake in Yakuza HQ long battles that end in a Patriarch boss fight, with Yakuza 1 concluding its Tojo long battle with a fight against Shimano, and Yakuza 2 concluding its Omi long battle with a fight against Ryuji. In chapter 5, we have the inclusion of a mandatory Colosseum tournament in both games, and we also have a Majima boss fight in the very same chapter, though under different circumstances, as he's literally a part of the Colosseum in Yakuza 2, which isn't the case in Yakuza 1. The final chapter of both games features a last-second reveal villain attacking us right before the final fight, and said villain happens to be a gun-wielding boss with a number of ads accompanying him, which for Yakuza 1 would be Jingu, and for Yakuza 2 would be Daijin Kim. Next we have Kurohyou 1 and Kurohyou 2. General similarities between the games include the fact that both campaigns are 10 chapters in length, as well as the prominence of underground Colosseum fighting in the stories, with chapters 2 through 9 of both campaigns all featuring such exhibitions. As for notable repeats occurring in different chapters, we have the mandatory introduction of the Tsukahara Dojo in Kurohyou 1's chapter 1 and 2's chapter 2, the inclusion of story recaps with Tenma at Cafe Alps in Kurohyou 1's chapter 6 and 2's chapter 7, using the florist to move the story forward, which occurs in the first game's chapters 5 and 6 and the sequel's chapter 5. We have the inclusion of a Takenaka info dump at Club Sega in chapter 9 of Kurohyou 1 and 5 of 2, a case of having two major boss fights happen within a single chapter in chapter 9 of the first game and chapter 8, as well as the finale of the second. And lastly, there's the addition of these weird chase sections that span all of Kamurocho, like the numerous instances where you need to run from the police in Kurohyou 1, and the section where you and Ryusho run from the Chinese mafia in chapter 5 of Kurohyou 2. It's such a mechanically specific addition that always sticks out due to the way it messes with the emulator settings and frame rate, so I felt obligated to bring it up. Notable repeats that occur in the same chapters include Chapter 1 in both games having a boss fight against Tomoki, both games ending their respective chapters 2, 4, 6, and 8 with boss fights at the Dragon Heat Arena, the fact we have a chat with Chiaki progress the story in chapter 6, we have Yurika progress the story via her cabaret affiliations in chapter 9, and the finales of Kurohyou both include long battles taking place within the Millennium Tower, with the final boss of both campaigns being fought on top of said tower. Now we have Judgment and Lost Judgment. General similarities include having a main story consisting of 13 chapters, an extended prologue preceding the actual chapter 1 title card, though said prologue is classified as part of the first chapter in the save files, having an antagonist group that's an extension of the secondary antagonist, Hound does for most of the campaign, so the Matsugane family being an extension of Hamura, and RK doing this for Soma, and lastly, chapters 3 and 4 in both games, having at least 2 mandatory side cases each in the critical path. Repeats from different chapters include the mandatory extracts tutorial detour, which happens in chapter 5 of Judgment and chapter 3 of LJ, the Saori dress-up sections tied to the cabaret in Judgment's chapter 7 and LJ's chapter 11, and the addition of a Saori interrogation section in Judgment's chapter 12 and LJ's chapter 6. As for repeats that occur in identical chapters, Chapter 1 of both entries introduces active search, tailing missions, chase sequences, and features an extended segment requiring a disguise from the player to progress the story, shown in the KJ Arts infiltration of the first game and the Seiryou High infiltration in LJ. Also, in the finale of both games, we have a long battle where Yagami, Sugiura, Higashi, and Kaito all fight together, which is accompanied with some form of a destination OST. Finally, we now have Yakuza 7 and Infinite Wealth. General similarities include dealing with a great dissolution as a prominent part of the narratives, the existence of 3 big shady groups handling everything in the city of choice, so the Seiryu, Komijul, and Liumang in Yakuza 7's Ijincho, or the Barracuda, Ganjo, and Palekana playing such a role in Hawaii. You get to fight individuals in the story who would later become your party members, so Jungi in Yakuza 7 and Tomizawa in Infinite. We have the narrative use of Yakuza members from past hierarchies banding together under a new brand for you to fight, exemplified in the existence of the Tokyo Omi Alliance in Yakuza 7, and a comparable writing choice with either the Seiryu clan or later on the Bleach Japan moniker in Infinite Wealth. There's also the use of the Ichiban brother conundrum, so to speak, seen in how Aokiryo was a brother to Ichi in a symbolic manner in Yakuza 7, and how Ebina was Ichiban's literal half-brother in Infinite. And then there's the mandatory visits to a bar, whose bartender is a character whose death was retconned from Yakuza 3, with Yokohama having Survive Bar fulfill that goal, and Hawaii doing this with Revolve Bar. Category 2, i.e. notable repeats from different chapters, include the game's pay-gating your progress in Yakuza 7's Chapter 12, requiring you to fork over 3 million yen so Ichi can challenge Aoki in the upcoming election, whereas Infinite Wealth pay-gates you in Chapter 9 by requiring $10,000, equating to 1 million yen, so you can get intel from a lady at a tattoo parlor. There's an excavator boss in both games, with Yakuza 7 having this in Chapter 6, whereas Infinite has you fight 2 excavators at once in Chapter 11. We have a fight against Sawashiro happening in Chapters 2 and 13 of Yakuza 7 and Chapter 10 of Infinite. We have the fighting of animals as bosses in the Critical Path, with Yakuza 7's Tiger fight occurring in Chapter 10, and Infinite having you fight a shark and a giant squid in the finale of the game. The Seiryu Clan HQ acts as a mandatory story dungeon in both games, in Yakuza 7's Chapter 4 and Infinite Wealth's Chapter 1, and you have the mandatory Poundmate introduction detour in 7's Chapter 4 and Infinite's Chapter 3. Now, at long last, we have the notable repeats happening in the same chapters. First off, there's the presence of time skips in the first chapter. Yakuza 7 has a scene from 1971, fast forward to the year 2000, and then there's another time skip related to Ichiban's prison sentence, whereas Infinite Wealth has the 1-year time skip between Ichiban's date with Saeko and lamenting on being left undelivered, alongside the flashback showing the murder of the old Palekana sage, if you wish to count that as well. Next, we have the Chapter 12 fight against the Jimas, which includes Majima and Saejima in Yakuza 7 and adds Daigo into the mix in Infinite Wealth. And lastly, there's the return to Kamurocho in the finale, with a Millennium Tower long battle and a final boss you fight near the top of the infrastructure, but not literally on top of the tower, like you would in the older games. Dear God, this was so crushing. Why the hell did I write the script this way? So, as it stands, Kurohyou 2 is the game that relied on its predecessor the least, at least in terms of direct callbacks, while Infinite Wealth took the most cues from what came before, which isn't really surprising considering how massive the campaign is and how it's the second turn-based game that RGG ever made, period. Now, to clarify, this isn't meant to be a case of poking fun at the games, it's just meant to point out some fun repeats from entry to entry to hopefully determine why people prefer the first game of the cycle over the second, or the second over the first. Also, it helps show how the argument of RGG only becoming formulaic these days is inaccurate, as they followed specific sequel blueprints or design callbacks for almost 20 years. There's likely a bunch of other repeats that I haven't mentioned here, so if there's anything new that comes to mind, or if you just want to shout out your favorite repeat from the video, the comment section is yours. Also, let me know if you prefer the more experimental, fresh beginning entries of RGG's catalog, or the games that refine the previous bases and add more content. Either way, thank you for indulging me in this bizarre subject of discussion, and I hope that you learned something new in the process. So, until next time, take care of yourselves and have a great day. Cheers!